Hey ladies, today we are going to be talking about first fruits, and we are going to read from 1 Samuel in chapter 2, and we're going to start at verse 12 and read through verse 17. And we're going to be talking about Eli, who was a priest, and his two sons who were priests. Eli's sons were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord. Now, it was the practice of the priest that whenever any of the people offered a sacrifice, the priest servant would come with a three-pronged fork in his hand while the meat was being boiled and would plunge the fork into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. Whatever the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is how they treated all the Israelites who came to Shiloh. But even before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the person who was sacrificing, "Give the priest some meat to roast. He won't accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." If the person said to him, "Let the fat be burned first, and then take whatever you want," the servant would answer, "No, hand it over now. If you don't, I'll take it by force." This sin of the young men was very great in the Lord's sight, for they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. So people would bring their sacrifices, the best of what they had. That's what God loves us so much. He gives us his very best, and all he asks from us in return is just a portion of what he already gave us. He just wants a portion of it back, and he wants the best. He wants our best offering. And so in this situation, people were bringing their best to God, and what the priests were doing was, instead of following the law that God had given them, the direction that God had given them in taking the offerings and allowing them to be offered to the Lord and then eating some of what was brought, they were taking the very best, and they were taking basically the first fruits of the first fruits. So our lives, God has told us to produce fruit. And we know from the word that the fruit of housing God, of saying, "God, come into my life, live in me," the fruit of what comes out when we are filled by God's Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and goodness and faithfulness and self-control. We know that's the fruit that comes out of us, but we also produce other kinds of fruit. So when we work, we usually make money, and we make money. The money is used by the congregation, the church that we attend, to do the work of the Lord. And so God is saying, "I want 10% of what I've already given you, and I want it to be your best." So when you make that money, the first check you write or the first payment you make is back to my house of worship, to my house where people come together and praise me and worship me, and then go out and reach other people. And so our first fruits are to go back to God for whatever he wants to do with it. And so here these people are bringing their first fruits, and Eli's two sons, these two priests, are just taking the best of what people had to offer to God. They are taking the first fruits of the first fruits. And that is why God is super unhappy with them. And he says they are scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord. And he reveals to us that they were treating his offering with contempt. And later in 1 Samuel, he reveals that not only would he not tolerate them being priests anymore, but they're going to die on the same day in battle. And it comes true. And so it's a lesson for us that God is not going to tolerate us taking from what other people are bringing to him. He's not going to tolerate that. And he loves us. He loves us so much, and he wants us to willingly give up our first fruits, and he wants us to be responsible with what he's been given. But he is God, and he is in control, and he is not going to let the people who run his church, his congregation, his synagogue, his temple, he's not going to let those people lead all these other people astray and treat his offering with contempt. And so the question for us today is, what are we offering God? Are we offering God our first fruits, or are we just offering him our leftovers? Are we taking the first fruits of the first fruits, or are we focused in on what God has planned for us and following his word and being obedient to him? So something to think about. Y'all have a great day.